In the mid-1930s, all leading aviation nations saw the emergence of the so-called New Wave fighters, cantilever monoplanes with retractable landing gear and enclosed cockpits. The first aircraft of this type adopted by the French Air Force was the Morane-Saulnier MS.406C1. Its history began in September 1934. The MS.405N1 was built in the summer of 1935, and on August 8th, pilot Detroit took it for its maiden flight. The MS.405N02 took off in January 1937. Soon, the two-pitch propeller was replaced by an automatic Hispano-Suiza 27M. In March, the fighter was handed over to Air Force test pilots. This machine was plagued by misfortunes. It spent more time under repair than in the air. In March, the pilot crashed into a marker post. In May, the plane was landed with the gear forgotten up. And in July, pilot Ribière lost consciousness at high altitude due to oxygen equipment failure and crashed. Yet, even under these circumstances, it was determined that the change of engine and propeller significantly improved the aircraft's characteristics. Its speed rose to 300 miles per hour. The MS-405 had no rivals. Gauthier's bet on proven design solutions was paying off for the time being. He had won time against his competitors. In February 1938, the first pre-series aircraft were manufactured. 15 fighters were intended for extended trials and various experiments, and the last one was to become the standard for mass production. In April, the nationalized Western Aircraft Company received an official order for 50 machines under the designation MS-406. 4 months later, another order for 80 aircraft was added. The first prototype of the MS-406 was the MS-405N04, which became the MS-406N04 on paper. It was powered by a Hispano-Suiza 12Y31 engine, differing from the 12Y CRS by a new reduction gear and lower design altitude. The engine could accommodate either an S9 cannon or the more advanced 20mm Hispano-Suiza HS-404. On serial aircraft, a wing lightened by 50 pounds, tested on the MS-405N12, was planned. Mass production was scheduled at 4 factories. In April 1938, in addition to the supplementary order for 325 fighters at the nationalized Western factories, contracts existed with 2 enterprises for 130 and 370 machines. In August, another order for 90 MS-406s was received by Aeroplanes Morane-Saulnier, but eventually only 2 assembly lines remained, at the state-run factory and Morane-Saulnier. The other factories were relegated to the status of subcontractors. In June 1938, the standard for mass production was assembled. By the beginning of 1939, the first dozen MS-406C1s manufactured by the Western Consortium were accepted into service. In January, the first serial fighter assembled by Morane-Saulnier took to the air. 4.5 years had passed since the issuance of the specification, and during this time the world had changed a great deal. Potential adversaries had also changed. World aircraft construction had moved far ahead. In early 1938, British aviation received the Hurricane and the Spitfire. If the former was at least equivalent to the MS-406, the latter was head and shoulders above it. And the Germans by this time had the more advanced Bf-109E. The French were clearly late with the rearmament of their fighter aviation. Production rates grew extremely slowly. There was a shortage of a number of parts manufactured by subcontractors as well as equipment. Most critical was the shortage of engines, which were installed on many types of aircraft. They attempted to solve this problem through imports. Hispano-Suiza engines and their variants were manufactured under license in many countries. At the end of 1938, an agreement was concluded to purchase engines in Czechoslovakia at the Avia plants, with a supply of up to 25 units per month. But before its occupation, France managed to receive only about 80 examples. Attempts were made to buy 200 M100As from the USSR, but they were refused. Instead, an agreement was reached with the Swiss concern Saurer, which was mastering the production of the 12Y31. But engine production there began only after the defeat of France. The introduction of the new fighter into the French Air Force began in May 1938, when the first group of the 7th Fighter Wing, Group 17, received the first MS-405s for familiarization. This same unit was the first to be equipped with serial MS-406C1s. It was followed by the unit Group 16. However, Due to production difficulties, by the end of the year, only 27 Morane aircraft were listed in service. In the spring of 1939, fighter production rates increased. In April, at the nationalized plant in Nantes alone, 6 machines were being assembled per day. But many of them remained on the ground due to a lack of equipment. Nevertheless, by May, 7 more air groups were converting to the MS-406. Gauthier's fighter was generally very well received by line pilots. The machine proved accessible even to a not very experienced pilot. Low wing loading ensured good maneuverability in horizontal flight and an acceptable landing speed. The transition to the MS-406 proceeded without complications, so training two-seaters were not produced. Only 3 two-seat MS-407 LPs were built with HS-12Y-CRS-2 engines of 930 horsepower. They were intended for experiments with bailing out of the fighter at high speeds. The parachutist's compartment was located in place of the fuel tank in front of the pilot's cockpit, and the fuel was moved to the wing. Pilots noted insufficient engine power. Moreover, due to engine overheating, it was difficult to operate at maximum regimes. To obtain a speed of about 280 miles per hour, it was necessary to retract the radiator, but doing so caused the engine to overheat. There were other defects as well. The propeller pitch change mechanism often froze. The main landing gear struts were sometimes pulled out of their bays during aerobatic maneuvers. In peacetime, this was acceptable, but in combat, an unexpected loss of speed is dangerous. There were also cases of the radiator deploying on its own. The machine gun mounts were not rigid enough and reduced shooting accuracy. At altitudes over 13,000 feet, the machine guns, which lacked heating, would freeze. The Mac 1934 machine guns themselves were also criticized for their obsolete drum feed system, small ammunition capacity. Furthermore, one could only get to the magazine after partially dismantling the machine gun. The gun sight also proved unsuccessful, distinguished by low reliability and accuracy. Therefore, the primitive backup sight on the cowling, ring, and bead proved to be far from superfluous. Aircraft produced in 1939 differed slightly from their predecessors. Their landing gear struts were reinforced, and from March some MS-406s were equipped with the faster-firing HS-404 cannon, while the old S-9 was not installed at all. Although the Morane was not prone to nosing over, a rollover pylon began to be installed behind the pilot's cockpit. Some aircraft were equipped with individual exhaust stacks. Line units also made their contribution to improving the fighter. From autumn, on their own initiative, they began installing armored seatbacks with headrests. In North Africa, where Group 16 and Group 17 arrived in the summer, they reinforced the horizontal stabilizers and the horn balances of the elevators, which were damaged by stones flying up from the wheels. From September, similar measures were taken at serial factories. In December 1939, drop tanks were tested on one aircraft, increasing the range from 460 to 930 miles. 100 sets of such tanks came in handy during the ferrying of aircraft to Syria. By September 1939, when Germany attacked France, its air force numbered 557 Moranes in 12 groups of 26 fighters each. During the period of the so-called Phony War, clashes between Moranes and German aircraft occurred infrequently. Yet it was possible to determine the real value of the MS-406 as a combat machine. Its main adversary became the Messerschmitt Bf 109E. The latter surpassed it in speed by almost 50 miles per hour, had a better climb rate, and more powerful armament. True, the ammunition supply of the MS-406C1 was greater than that of the adversary. The HS-404 was equipped with 60 rounds, while the MGFF on the Messerschmitt had 20. The French machine had a smaller turning radius, which allowed it to successfully wage battle in the horizontal plane, but it was distinguished by the vulnerability of its pneumatic, hydraulic, and electrical systems. With bombers, it would seem, the MS-406 should have coped more easily, but even here it confidently intercepted only the Ju-87B and He-111, while the Do-17Z often broke away from them. During the entire period of the Phony War, the French lost 14 MS-406, the first of which the Germans shot down on September 21st. However, the obsolescence of the Morane became obvious. Designers sought ways to modernize the machine, and the military made every effort to replace it with the new D-520 and MB-151 fighters. Back in 1937, Morane-Saulnier proposed the MS-540 project to the Air Force, effectively the same MS-405 but with a metal semi-monocoque fuselage, a slightly modified wing, and reinforced armament consisting of a cannon and 4 machine guns. The engine remained the old 12Y CRS, but with a larger fixed ventral water radiator housed in a new cowling. 2 examples of the MS-540 were built in the spring of 1939. In tests, it reached a speed of 346 miles per hour. However, the Air Force chose the D-520. In 1938, the Hispano-Suiza 12Y45 engine of 910 horsepower was installed on the MS-405N12 as a prototype for the MS-411 modification, and the 12Y51 of 1,100 horsepower on the N13 as a prototype for the MS-408. However, the new engines were still far from perfection. Consequently, at the end of 1939, taking into account the first combat experience, 2 more projects for modernizing the MS-406 were prepared under the names MS-409 and MS-410. The first involved installing the radiator from the MS-540 on the 406. The second involved not only replacing the radiator but also modernizing the wing to house 4 MAC 1934 M39 machine guns with belt feed and an ammunition capacity of up to 500 rounds per barrel. The machine guns were equipped with heating and a new electro-pneumatic firing system. A more streamlined canopy windshield was introduced, as well as jet exhaust stacks, which provided a speed increase of 12 to 31 miles per hour and an improved gun sight. The prototype MS-410 was built in March 1940. The Air Force deemed the work successful and ordered the conversion of 500 fighters to the new standard. Priority was given to machines with new Radier 1607 propellers. The first 4 serial conversions were prepared by May. Before the start of the German offensive in the West, they managed to produce only about 150 sets of new wings and partially convert up to a dozen aircraft. Initially, the conversion was performed by assembly plants, and then this function was transferred to military workshops in Clermont-Ferrand. The rhythm of work was seriously hampered by the acute need of air units to replace losses, which did not allow aircraft to be withdrawn from the front for modernization. Not a single MS-410 took part in combat operations in France in 1940. Some of the changes planned for the MS-410 were introduced on the last series of MS-406s produced that same year, or on early machines directly at the front. This included the new gun sight and the enlarged armored seat back. At field airfields, systems for heating machine guns and the cockpit with exhaust gases, as well as rear-view mirrors, were installed. Fighters manufactured in 1940 were equipped with a Ratier 1607 propeller with a diameter of 10 feet. Although it was clear that the aircraft was obsolete, its production continued, ensuring the rapid numerical growth of the Air Force. Only in March, when it was possible to set up the assembly of the D-520 and expand the production of the MB-151 and MB-152, was it removed from production. The MS-406 forever remained the record holder for mass production among French fighters. Together with the MS-405, 1,098 units were built. This aircraft continued to remain the main fighter of the French Air Force in May, when the Germans went on the offensive. In combat units and reserve, there were about 800 MS-406s with another 135 based in the colonies. In total, on May 1st, there were 1,070 MS-405 and MS-406 fighters. In air defense units, MS-405s were still kept in some places. Using the high maneuverability of the Morane, experienced pilots sometimes achieved significant successes. Thus, pilots of Group 1-2 on June 8th, in a battle with 11 Bf-109Es, shot down 9, losing only 2 of their own MS-406s, and on May 13th, a sextet from Group 2-2 destroyed 6 twin-engine Bf-110s in 20 seconds. In total, Morane shot down about a third of the aircraft lost by the Germans in the French campaign. But this was due to numbers rather than the high quality of the machine. In any case, only 2 pilots who fought on the MS-406 appeared on the list of top French aces of that time: Le Gloan and Le Nigen, with 11 confirmed and 2 unconfirmed victories each. To the MS-406 also belongs the honor of the last victory before the armistice with the Germans. On June 24th, an HS-126 reconnaissance plane was shot down. The lack of modern battlefield aircraft forced the French command to use fighters as ground attack aircraft. The effectiveness of the MS-406, which had no bomb racks and weak armament, was low in this role, and losses were significant. During such operations, Group 16 and Group 22 suffered heavily. The successes achieved generally cost the MS-406 dearly. About 150 MS-406s were shot down, and approximately 100 lost on the ground. Especially many aircraft perished on the ground during massive German raids on May 10th. Groups 27, 26, and 32 were battered so severely that they were withdrawn for re-equipment with other types of fighters. Of all French fighters, the Morane firmly held first place in relative losses. For one shot-down MS-406, there were 2.5 enemy aircraft. Ironically, the last aircraft shot down in the campaign of May-June 1940 was also an MS-406, piloted by Pivot from the Naval Squadron AC-5. After the capitulation of France, 453 MS-406s were counted in the unoccupied zone, including unserviceable machines. In total, 5 groups in France, 3 in North Africa, and 1 in Syria were equipped with them. Under the terms of the agreement with the Germans, Marshal Peyton's government was obliged to sharply reduce the size of the armed forces. This also affected aviation. First of all, units armed with obsolete equipment were disbanded. Therefore, by September 1940, no combat groups on MS-406s remained on the country's territory. Moranes were preserved in training units, flight schools, and in the colonies. Workshops continued work on converting aircraft to the MS-410 standard, but they did not get to enter battle. But in the colonies, they fought a little more. In January 1941, a small conflict broke out in Indochina. Thailand, hoping for France's defeat in the war with Germany, attempted to seize a number of border regions of Cambodia, which was then part of the colony of French Indochina. A squadron armed with 20 MS-406C1s was based there. During a raid by Thai Ki-21 bombers on the Nakhon Wat airfield, a battle took place between a quartet of Moranes and 4 escort Hawk 75N fighters. According to Thai data, 2 MS-406s were shot down, but the French deny this. The main adversary for the Vichy government fighters became their former allies, the British. In May-June 1941, British troops, together with units of General de Gaulle, began an offensive in Syria and Lebanon, which then belonged to France. In Lebanon, at Rayak, Group 17 was based. The British, having a significant advantage in forces, partially destroyed it, and the remnants surrendered. Approximately the same fate befell Squadron 565 in Madagascar, where after the Allied landing in May 1942 and subsequent battles, out of 17 MS-406s, only 3 survived by November. In aerial combat, the squadron's pilots shot down only 1 Martlet carrier-based fighter. In November, the Germans seized the previously unoccupied part of France. In doing so, they acquired 46 MS-406s stored in training units, flight schools, and in conservation. With this, the combat career of the Moranes in the French Air Force practically ended. The Germans sold some of the aircraft to their Croat allies, who equipped 2 squadrons with them and used some as trainers. A few MS-406s that survived the war flew in the flight school in Bretigny until 1947. After the capitulation in June 1940, some machines fought in the ranks of the Allies. In total, 3 MS-406s flew over to British airfields in Egypt and Palestine at that time. From them, the Second Flight of Free France was formed, which participated in combat operations in North Africa until April 1941. Later, in July, the British obtained a dozen Moranes of Group 17 as trophies. They were used in the formation of the French fighter group Alsace, which fought against the Germans but already on more modern equipment. MS-406s served significantly longer in a number of foreign countries. The first foreign order for these fighters came in 1938 from Lithuania. During familiarization with the MS-405N1 machine, pilot Makinas crashed. Nevertheless, the aircraft was ordered. The export MS-406L, which differed in instruments and radio equipment, was tested in the spring of 1939, but the French government prohibited their export. The entire batch for Lithuania was brought to standard specifications and transferred to the French Air Force. That same year, a request for 12 aircraft came from China, but during the Munich crisis, the contract was canceled and the built fighters were requisitioned. However, in the summer of 1939, a dozen MS-406s were indeed taken from Air Force stocks, and sent by sea to Haiphong, from where they were to reach China by rail. In fact, 1 or 2 machines reached China, and even those without cannons. The others, which did not manage to cross the border before the start of World War II, were detained in Indochina to reinforce colonial aviation. All further deliveries were made from Air Force reserves. Poland ordered 160 aircraft in 1939, but not a single one reached there. In November, taking advantage of the concluded Anglo-Franco-Turkish agreement, the Turkish Air Force requested a batch of MS-406s. 30 machines were delivered to them almost immediately, and another 15 in the spring of 1940. In Turkey, they served until 1950. The Greeks ordered 25 MS-406s but received 9 MB-151s instead. In April 1940, Yugoslavia requested 25 aircraft, but there was no time to send them. 2 years later, the Vichy government sold 20 MS-406s to Bulgaria. Switzerland set up its own production, specifically the manufacture of modernized MS-406H variants under license. The aircraft had the same 12Y31 engine with a retractable radiator but differed in equipment and armament. 2 Swiss machine guns of 0.30-inch caliber with belt feed in the wings. The first French-made example was ferried to Switzerland in September 1938. The MS-406H was produced in Switzerland by the firm EFW from November 1939 under the designation D3800. From April 1940, it began entering the Air Force. In total, 4 squadrons were equipped with them. The D3800 differed externally from the MS-406 by a new radio antenna with a mast on the right side of the cowling, a tailwheel instead of a skid, and jet exhaust stacks. By August 1940, 80 units of the D3800 had been manufactured. In 1942, 2 more machines were assembled from spare parts. From the autumn of 1940, EFW began producing the D3801 modification with a Saurer YS-1 engine of 1,020 takeoff horsepower, based on the experimental MS-408. A non-retractable radiator and armored windscreen appeared on the aircraft with a reinforced fuselage. The D3801 became slightly heavier but still gained in maximum speed, up to 325 miles per hour, and rate of climb. The first D3801 was handed over to the Swiss Air Force in December 1940. 100 such aircraft were built. In 1943, another 10 fighters were assembled from spare parts. By that time, even the modernized D3801 no longer met the requirements of the time, but there was nowhere to buy modern aircraft in war conditions. Their own developments of such a level did not exist. And in September 1944, production was resumed, manufacturing another 97 machines. After the end of the war, the D3800s were relegated to training status and operated until the mid-1950s. Some of them were converted to the D3801 standard. After the war, they were converted into ground attack aircraft, equipped with underwing racks for 6 3-inch rockets, new propellers, and American radios. The last of them served in Air Force Reserve units until May 1959. In 1943, Morane-Saulnier transferred the blueprints for the MS-540 to Switzerland. This helped Swiss designers create the D3802 modification with a Saurer YS-2 engine of 1,150 horsepower. The first experimental D3802 took to the air in September 1944. At the beginning of 1945, a second aircraft was prepared, the D3802A, with 2 cannons in the wing and 1 firing through the propeller hub. The Swiss Air Force ordered 100 such machines, but received only 10, which were operated until 1956. A single example of the improved D3803 was built, distinguished by a YS-3 engine of 1,500 horsepower, a bubble-type canopy with all-round visibility, and clipped wingtips. The machine made its first flight in May 1947. The era of jet aviation was already beginning, and it was not put into series production. The sole manufactured aircraft, nevertheless, served until the mid-1950s. Morane lived a long life in Finland. The first MS-406s arrived there in December 1939 during the Winter War. Compared to the fighters available to the Finns, the Fokker D-21, Bristol Bulldog 4A, and Gloucester Gladiator 1, the French machines were a significant step forward. Squadron 28 was armed with MS-406s and entered combat in February 1940. MS-406s were mostly used by the Finns to cover obsolete fighters used as ground attack aircraft. Sometimes Moranes acted against ground troops, although they lacked not only bomb armament but also cannons. In 1941, the Finnish government additionally purchased 27 captured Moranes from Germany. Among them were MS-406s and MS-410s. German equipment, a tailwheel, and additional armor protecting the water radiator and the pilot were installed on the aircraft repaired in Germany. Subsequently, the Finns modernized the aircraft that survived the Winter War according to this standard. These machines took part in the Continuation War, World War II. Initially, the Moranes had some success as long as they were opposed by obsolete Soviet fighters. In 1942, another 30 Moranes, sold by the Vichy government from reserves, were added to them. However, their value was constantly falling. It was decided to improve the MS-406 using Soviet M105P engines of 100 horsepower. The latter, just like the 12Y31, was a product of the evolution of the 12Y-CRS engine. In 1943, 200 M105P engines, which had undergone restoration at the Prague Avia plant, were purchased in Germany along with Vichy 61P propellers. A prototype of the modernized Mirko Morane was manufactured at the plant in Tampere under the direction of engineer A. Lacoma. Lacoma changed the engine installation and designed a new cowling into which he fitted the oil cooler in a step underneath. The non-retractable water radiator, more compact than on the D3801 and MS-410, Lacoma positioned as if on a second floor under the oil cooler. Initially, they wanted to put a VYA-23 cannon in the cylinder bank, then a German MG-151-20, but finally settled on the Soviet UBK machine gun. This powerful and reliable weapon allowed weight to be saved without significant detriment to firepower and preserved the center of gravity close to the original. By the way, the UBK in Finland was often mounted instead of the S9 or HS-404 on ordinary MS-406s as well. The experimental Mirko showed a significant increase in flight data during tests. Although the aircraft became heavier, the maximum speed increased to 326 miles per hour. The rate of climb improved significantly, especially at low altitudes, and the ceiling rose from 30,800 to 39,400 feet. Inspired by the success, the Finns decided to convert all their Moranes to the new standard. From June 1944, the Mirko were thrown into battle. And on September 4th, Finland concluded an armistice with the USSR and began combat operations against its former allies, the Germans. The conversion of the MS-406 into the Mirko continued until the beginning of 1945, but the low-capacity plant in Tampere, loaded with other work, was able to modernize only 15 machines during this period. After the conclusion of the peace treaty, the Finnish Air Force was significantly reduced. Many aircraft, mostly of obsolete types, went for scrap. Among them were the MS-406s. However, a certain number of Mirko served in a squadron as training machines until 1952. The MS-406 was a decent aircraft when it was designed, but the lengthy introduction into production devalued the gain in time that Gauthier obtained through the compromise decisions he made. It turned out to be an aircraft without a future, incapable of long evolution. However, thanks to its mass production, it made its considerable contribution to the history of aerial warfare.